So let's start out here by talking about how my canoe is set up right now, because it's really important to make sure that all your gear is well organized and that it's tied down really tightly. So if you end up in a capsized situation, you don't lose your gear and it doesn't create an entanglement hazard while you're trying to get back into the boat. So I keep most of the stuff in my canoe tied down with these little ball bungees. And the nice thing about having a skin-on frame canoe is that there's lots of attachment points where you can loop these things through and then it just ties down like that. It gives you a really nice, clean way to secure gear anywhere you need it. So specifically, I've got a spare paddle right here. You always want to have a spare paddle anytime you're going out boating. I've got my sail tied down with a ball bungee on this side, and I've got the halyard coiled up and tucked nice and tightly underneath that so I don't have a loose rope in the bottom of the boat. I've got my seating mat here, which is a Thermarest ridge rest, and I've got a little hole cut in the middle so I can get my bilge pump all the way to the bottom so I can pump out any water that's left over after my rescue. I've got my bilge pump off to the side here, and behind me here what I've got is a 30-liter dry duffel bag. This just happens to be a Watershed Chattooga bag. It's a really well-built, really waterproof dry bag, and inside of this I would have my spare clothes, my water, my food, my camera, everything that I would need on a day trip or everything that I would need to access during the day on a longer camping trip. And the way I've got this set up is really specific. I've got this attached to the canoe by a 3.5 foot length of 1/8 inch cord that's hooked onto a wire gate carabiner on the canoe. So the final part of my setup here is really the backbone of this rescue, and that's my flotation strategy. And what I'm using for flotation right now is 2 4-inch diameter pool noodles that are lashed to the inside of the boat on either side of the canoe. And what these do is they give me enough flotation that if the canoe is swamped, I can turn it on its side, it'll automatically dump out all the water, and then I can turn it back to flat again and crawl back into the canoe. Now, before I talk about how that whole process works, the one thing I think is really important to mention here is that these are enough flotation to do a self-rescue, but they're not enough flotation to effectively paddle a swamped boat. So if you might be out in circumstances where you'll have no choice but to paddle the canoe, even if it's swamped, then you want to be thinking about adding additional flotation to either end of the canoe. So let's go through this step by step here. And the first thing I want you to do is imagine that I'm wearing a PFD and that I'm also wearing the appropriate immersion gear for whatever situation I'm paddling in. Now, I've fallen out of the canoe for whatever reason and I'm floating in the water. The very first thing you need to do is reach over and grab the canoe so the wind doesn't take it away from you. So I've got my canoe here, and I'm going to take my paddle, I'm going to put it inside the boat here. You could tie this down, but I think that takes a little bit too much time, and you've already got a spare paddle tied in here, so you don't have to worry about that. The next thing that's really nice here about having this dry bag here on this 3-foot tether is that when you fall out of the canoe, it automatically drags in the water beside you, which is great because now all I have to do is reach back, put my arm through the strap of the Watershed dry bag here, and now I'm attached to the boat by the dry bag and the 3-foot tether, but not in a way that is so tight that it's going to create an entanglement hazard. So I've got both my hands free to do the rest of my rescue. Now, what I do from this point really depends on the situation I capsized in. If I capsized while I was sailing, I'm going to take a minute to drop the sail and put it into the bottom of the canoe. And then the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn the canoe on its side like this. And that is automatically going to dump all the water out. You're going to end up, just from the flotation of this pool noodle right here, dumping 95% of the water out in about 3 or 4 seconds. So once all the water's out of the canoe, all you've got to do is put this thing back to flat here, and then I swim up next to the canoe, I reach inside, I wrap my hands around the pool noodle, and then with one thrust and kick, I push myself up and across the canoe like this. And if you do this quickly enough, it's not going to submerge the gunnel here, and you're not going to take on very much water. So once I'm across the boat, I climb in, and I take a moment, I get myself situated. You can take your dry bag, put it back inside, and the next thing I want to do is just get any extra water out of the bottom of the boat. So I'm going to reach over here, I'm going to grab my pump, and this is what's nice about having this hole cut in the mat here, so you can get this pump all the way to the bottom of the boat so you can pump out any extra water that's in there. So at this point, the boat is empty of water, I'm back in, and I'm ready to keep paddling. Now, another variation that you can do on this rescue is to use a double-bladed paddle slid underneath the shock cord loops in the front or the back of the gunnels here to act as a stabilizer. Now, the upside of using a double-bladed paddle as a stabilizer is that it makes the gunnel less likely to submerge when you go to hop back into the boat, and it also keeps the boat a little bit more stable while you're getting situated and before you start paddling again. The downside is that it's just one more additional piece of complexity that you've got to manage before you can get back into your bows. So I would say try to do it and try to learn how to do it effectively just by jumping over the side without setting up a stabilizer, but also practice setting yourself up with a stabilizer, because that's going to give you one more tool in your self-rescue arsenal. Now, an additional thing you can do if you're using a paddle as a stabilizer here is you can add a paddle float to the end of it, and that's just going to make the system a lot more stable, but it's also one more piece of complexity, one more thing to manage, and therefore one more thing to go wrong. So whatever rescue strategy you ultimately decide to go with here, the thing I really want to emphasize is that if you want these rescues to work for you in real life, you have to practice them frequently in the conditions where you could potentially need them. Don't expect to do this once or twice in the summer when the water's warm and the conditions are calm, and expect it to work for you in rough, cold water when your boat is completely loaded. You have to practice, because by practicing, not only are you going to identify any potential problems and learn how to solve those problems before the real world situation happens, but it's really going to enhance your creative problem solving skills. Because I can tell you from personal experience that every real world self-rescue I've been involved in doesn't go like the ones that we do in practice. Usually there's some kind of problem that I have to solve before I can complete the rescue. Now, the final thing I want to recommend is that if you're paddling in a place where the water temperatures are a little bit cooler, that you bite the bullet and you buy yourself a dry suit, because a dry suit is not only going to keep you warmer and it's going to keep you more comfortable on the water and when you're in the water, but it's going to make it far more likely that you're actually going to feel comfortable practicing your rescues. Because my experience is that when people don't have immersion gear, they rarely practice their rescues, which means that they're rarely ready with those rescues when they need them in real life. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Be safe on the water. I will see you next time.